A diver floats in open water, unaware of the shadow rising beneath him. A massive great white explodes from the depths, its jaws clamping down with bone-crushing force. Blood fills the ocean as the man's muffled screams vanish beneath the waves. His outstretched hand breaks the surface for a brief, desperate moment. Then he is gone. The camera still records the last violent thrash before the feed cuts to black. This is just one of 6 terrifying shark attacks where the ocean turned into a hunting ground and humans became prey. The ocean was calm that morning, the waters near Neptune Island stretching endlessly toward the horizon. The sky was clear, and the crew of the Abyss Explorer prepared for what was meant to be another adrenaline-fueled broadcast. It was January 9th, 2025, and German YouTuber Nico Wagner, famous for pushing the limits of extreme adventure, was about to perform his most dangerous stunt yet, diving with great white sharks without the protection of a cage. For weeks, Nico had teased his audience about this challenge. His fan base, made up of thrill-seekers and adventure lovers, was eager to watch him enter the waters where some of the world's largest great whites roamed. Shark cage diving was a well-regulated activity in these waters, but Nico wanted more than just a thrill. Direct, unfiltered contact with the ocean's apex predator. The crew, led by Australian marine guide Jared Lawson, had warned Nico multiple times. They had seen firsthand how unpredictable great whites could be, especially in open water. But Nico was confident, flashing his usual grin at the camera as his livestream audience climbed past 300,000 viewers. With a wetsuit half-zipped and a mask resting on his forehead, Nico sat on the edge of the boat, his feet dangling just above the surface. He adjusted the camera strap to his chest, ensuring his audience had the best view possible. Behind him, Jared and 2 other crew members, Alex Carter and Finn McGregor, exchanged uneasy glances. The waters around Neptune Islands were famous for shark activity. Great whites migrated here in large numbers, drawn by the seal colonies that thrived on the rocky shores. Scientists often traveled to this very spot to study their hunting patterns. These sharks weren't just curious. They were fast, powerful, and equipped with an instinct sharpened by millions of years of evolution. Despite the risks, Nico gave one last wave to the camera and slipped into the water. He floated just beyond the boat, scanning the deep blue below. Schools of small fish darted past him, but there was no immediate sign of sharks. He grinned at the camera, kicking lightly to stay afloat. For the first few minutes, everything was going as planned. Nico spoke to his audience through his waterproof microphone, joking about how he was becoming one with the ocean. Viewers flooded the chat with excited messages, urging him to go deeper. Then, the first shadow appeared. Jared saw it before Nico did. A massive shape gliding beneath the surface. It was moving slowly but with purpose. The crew tensed. The shark was close. Nico, unaware, kept talking. The chat erupted as viewers noticed the looming shape before he did. Then, in a sudden burst of motion, the great white accelerated. Before anyone could react, the shark erupted from the depths. The force of the attack was like an explosion. The massive 20-foot great white lunged from below, its jaws clamping onto Nico's right thigh. A muffled, choked scream escaped him as the water turned red instantly. The impact sent shockwaves through the ocean, scattering smaller fish in every direction. The camera on Nico's chest captured the horrifying struggle. His body twisted violently as the shark's powerful jaws crushed bone and muscle. The massive predator shook him, thrashing its head from side to side. On the boat, Jared shouted for the crew to throw the rescue lines, but there was no time. The great white yanked Nico downward, dragging him beneath the surface. His outstretched hand broke the water for a split second, fingers clawing desperately for anything to hold on to. Then he was gone. The live stream feed flickered as bubbles and blood clouded the lens. The chat was a blur of panicked messages. The last image captured before the feed cut was the shark's massive tail whipping through the water. Jared and Alex sprang into action. They grabbed the emergency gaffs and hooked them to the floating rescue harness. His face was pale, and Finn reached for the radio to call for medical help. Seconds later, Nico resurfaced. His face was contorted in agony, his eyes wide with shock. Blood poured from the wound, staining the water around him. The shark had released him, but the damage was catastrophic. His right thigh was nearly severed, muscle and bone exposed. Jared and Alex pulled him toward the boat as Finn yelled coordinates into the radio. Nico's body was limp, his breath coming in shallow gasps. The shark lingered nearby, circling slowly as if deciding whether to strike again. With all their strength, they hauled Nico onto the deck. His body was slick with blood, his wetsuit torn apart. Jared immediately pressed down on the wound, trying to slow the bleeding, but the damage was too severe. The bite had severed an artery. Nico's lips moved, but no words came out. His hands weakly gripped Jared's arm before falling away. Within minutes, his body went still. The crew remained frozen, the weight of the moment sinking in. Once calming, the sound of the ocean now felt like an ominous presence around them. The great white, its hunger unsatisfied, disappeared into the deep. Hours later, the footage spread like wildfire. The internet exploded with debates about influencers risking their lives for content. Some called him reckless and others called him a legend, but for those who had been there, who had seen it happen with their own eyes, one thing was clear: Nico Wagner had made his final dive. The USS Redemption sat anchored in the Pacific Ocean just off the coast of Guam. It was another long day for the crew aboard the naval vessel, going through their usual maintenance routines, inspections, and security checks. The ship had been stationed in this area for weeks, performing drills and ensuring everything ran smoothly. The waters around Guam were deep and full of marine life, including great white sharks, which often roamed the area searching for prey. These sharks were common in the Pacific, growing up to 20 feet long and weighing over 2,000 pounds. While they usually hunted seals and large fish, there were rare cases of attacks on humans, especially when they mistook them for prey in the water. It was a Thursday, August 17, 2020, and the diving crew had an inspection scheduled under the ship. The task was simple: check the hull for damage, clear any marine growth, and report anything unusual. The divers for the mission were Chief Petty Officer Nathan "Nate" Carter, Petty Officer First Class Gregory "Greg" Howell, and Seaman Victor Alvarez. Nate was the most experienced of the three, having spent nearly a decade as a Navy diver. He had seen it all: strong currents, low visibility, tangled equipment, even close encounters with sharks. Greg had been diving for 5 years, while Victor was newer, with only 2 years of experience. The three divers spent the morning preparing their gear. They checked their oxygen tanks, tested their radios, and secured their wetsuits and knives. The water conditions looked good, with steady currents and decent visibility. The ship's commanding officer gave them the go-ahead, and they moved toward the diving platform. A few crew members stood by to assist, ensuring everything was secure before they went in. Nate entered the water first, followed by Greg and Victor. The ocean wrapped around them, cool and silent, except for their breathing through the regulators. They adjusted their positions and slowly descended toward the hull of the USS Redemption. Flashlights cut through the dim water, revealing the ship's metal surface, which was covered in patches of barnacles and algae. The three divers spread out to cover different sections. Nate moved along the port side, scraping off marine growth and checking for cracks or weaknesses. Greg worked a few feet away, inspecting the ship's lower structure, while Victor stayed near the center, using his flashlight to scan for anything unusual. It was routine work, something they had done countless times. A few minutes passed and everything seemed normal. The water was calm and visibility remained steady. Nate moved along the hull, carefully running his hand over the metal surface, feeling for anything out of place. The ship loomed above him, a massive shadow stretching in both directions. Then a voice broke through the radio. It was a warning. Something big was moving below them. Nate stopped. He turned his flashlight downward, scanning the deep, but he saw nothing at first. The ocean was dark, stretching far below, with only faint hints of movement in the distance. Greg and Victor also turned their lights down, trying to get a look. Seconds later, a massive shape shot upward from the depths. It moved fast. A 16-foot great white shark, its powerful body cutting through the water with terrifying speed. Before Nate could react, the predator slammed into him, knocking him backward. The impact sent pain through his ribs as he tumbled in the water. He barely had a second to recover before he felt teeth sink into his leg. The pressure was intense. The shark's jaws clamped down, tearing through his wetsuit, through muscle, through bone. A surge of pain shot through his body as blood burst into the water around him. The visibility dropped instantly as the red cloud spread. Greg and Victor saw everything. They kicked hard, rushing toward Nate, but the shark jerked him downward before they could reach him. Nate twisted, his hand scrambling for his knife. He grabbed it, slashing at the shark's snout. The blade made contact, and the shark released him momentarily. Nate was free, but his leg was destroyed. He couldn't move it. Blood poured from the wound, mixing into the water. He kicked with his other leg, desperate to get to the surface. But the shark wasn't finished. Greg reached out, grabbing Nate's arm and trying to pull him up. Victor turned, waving his flashlight frantically toward the surface, signaling for help. Crew members above saw the disturbance in the water. The emergency alarm sounded on the ship and rescue divers prepared to enter. Before Greg could pull Nate up, the shark came back. Faster, more violent. Its jaws snapped around Nate's torso. The pain was worse than before. He could feel his ribs cracking under the pressure. His vision blurred as the shark shook him, tearing through his body with brutal force. Greg screamed into his radio, pulling at Nate's harness, but the shark was too strong. It yanked him downward, thrashing. Nate couldn't fight anymore. His hands weakened. His knife slipped from his grip. Victor kicked toward the surface, trying to reach the rescue team, but it was too late. Greg lost his hold on Nate's harness as the shark dragged him deeper. The last thing he saw was Nate's eyes locking onto his for a split second before disappearing into the dark. Blood filled the water, swirling in thick clouds. The surface team arrived seconds later, dropping in with spear guns and emergency gear. They scanned the water, searching for any sign of Nate, but he was gone. Greg and Victor were pulled out immediately, both shaken and gasping for air. The rescue divers continued the search, moving in wider circles, scanning every direction, but nothing was left to find. For over an hour, the team searched. They never recovered the body. The ocean had taken him. The USS Redemption would leave the area days later, but the crew wouldn't forget what happened. The waters of the Pacific had claimed another life, a brutal reminder that out there, beneath the surface, there was always something waiting. July 19, 2024 was a perfect summer day for the Thompson family. The warm air, gentle waves, and crowded shores of Hilton Head Island, South Carolina, made it ideal for families to enjoy the water. Parents watched their children build sandcastles, teenagers ran along the shore, and lifeguards scanned the beach from their stations. Among the visitors was 7-year-old Mia Thompson, an energetic and playful girl who had been excited about this trip for weeks. She had begged her parents, Mark and Laura, to take her to the beach before summer ended. Mia spent most of the morning with her older brother, 10-year-old Jacob, splashing in the shallow water while their parents relaxed under an umbrella. The family had arrived at the beach early, setting up close to the lifeguard station for safety. Mia wore a bright yellow swimsuit, making it easy for her parents to spot her as she played. She loved the ocean but never strayed far, knowing her parents always warned her about strong currents. By noon, the beach was crowded. Families spread towels, seagulls hovered over picnic baskets, and the waves gently rolled onto the shore. Mia and Jacob chased each other in the surf, laughing as they jumped over small waves. Mark watched from his chair, occasionally glancing at his phone while Laura chatted with a nearby couple. Then everything changed in an instant. One moment, Mia was there, her laughter filling the air. The next, she was gone. A sudden disturbance in the water sent a ripple of panic through the nearby swimmers. Some thought it was a large fish. Others assumed it was a strong wave. But then a scream pierced the air. A teenage girl standing waist-deep in the water pointed toward a swirling patch of red. Jacob turned, expecting to see Mia beside him, but she wasn't there. He spun around, scanning the water, his heart pounding. Mark jumped up, running toward the waves, shouting Mia's name. Laura followed, her face contorted with fear. People nearby turned to look, realizing something was very wrong. The lifeguard blew his whistle, sprinting toward the shoreline while others desperately searched the water. Once filled with laughter and music, the beach fell into eerie silence as word spread that Mia had vanished. A nearby lifeguard blew his whistle, his sharp blasts cutting through the air, signaling an emergency. Parents grabbed their children, pulling them from the water, while others rushed toward the shoreline, scanning the waves. Within minutes, lifeguards sprang into action. 2 of them grabbed rescue boards and paddled out into the deeper water, scanning beneath the surface with desperate urgency. Others ran along the shore, asking beachgoers if they had seen anything. A call was made to local authorities, and soon beach patrol vehicles arrived, their flashing lights reflecting off the wet sand. A police officer approached Mark and Laura, trying to calm them enough to ask questions. How deep had Mia been? Had they seen anything unusual? Mark barely heard him, his eyes locked on the empty waves where his daughter had just been. More lifeguards arrived, forming a line along the shore, wading into the water and moving slowly in unison, searching for any trace of Mia. By nightfall, the reality of the situation set in. Mia was gone. The beach was cleared, and the once busy shore was now empty except for the flashing lights of emergency vehicles. Swimmers were ordered out of the water, and warning signs were posted along the entrances to the beach. Locals spoke in hushed tones, recalling past sightings of great white sharks in the area. Hilton Head Island had always been known for its wildlife, but attacks on humans were rare. Still, the way Mia vanished quickly and violently left people uneasy. Authorities hesitated to call it a shark attack without evidence. They listed Mia as missing, but in their hearts everyone knew. The ocean had taken her. 3 days later, on July 22nd, a fishing boat several miles offshore made an unsettling catch. The crew used to haul large fish and had hooked something massive. The ship tilted slightly under the weight as they struggled to reel it in. Finally, the shape of a gigantic great white shark emerged from the depths, thrashing violently as it was pulled closer. Though accustomed to sharks, the fishermen noticed something strange about this one. Its stomach bulged unnaturally, and its movements were sluggish, as if it had eaten something too large. Deep scars covered its body, signs of previous battles with other predators. Curious about the recent disappearance of a child, the crew contacted marine biologists from a nearby research facility. The shark was brought to shore, where scientists gathered to examine it. Given the circumstances, they decided to investigate further. A crowd formed at the dock as experts made the first incision. A sickening smell filled the air as they carefully opened the stomach. They first pulled out a torn piece of bright yellow fabric. Someone in the crowd gasped. Laura had told investigators that Mia had been wearing a yellow swimsuit the day she disappeared. Then came the confirmation no one wanted. Inside the shark's stomach were human remains. Small bones, fragments of skin. Forensic experts worked quickly, testing the DNA against Mia's hairbrush, which her parents provided. The results were undeniable. Mia had been swallowed whole. What happened? Experts gathered information to reconstruct the events of that day. The great white shark was likely hiding just beyond the sandbar. Splashing and playing in the shallow waves, Mia unknowingly triggered the predator's hunting instincts. Great white sharks are opportunistic feeders that hunt seals, fish, and other marine life. If they see something moving like prey, they attack. The shark must have struck incredibly fast, dragging Mia under before she could scream. The force of the bite likely crushed her instantly, leaving no chance for survival. The currents carried the predator further out before it finished consuming its prey. The reason no one found Mia's body was because there had been nothing left to see. The discovery devastated the community. News of the attack spread quickly, reaching national headlines. Parents were terrified, demanding more safety measures, while officials scrambled to reassure the public. The beach where Mia had once played was now marked with warning signs. Lifeguards patrolled more frequently, but no one felt truly safe. For the Thompson family, there was no closure. There was no funeral, no last goodbye, only the knowledge that the ocean had taken their little girl in the most violent way imaginable. Mia's story became a warning, a haunting reminder of what lurked beneath the surface. The beach remained, the waves rolling in as they always had, uncaring and unchanged. But the water would never look the same again for those who had been there that day. Antarctica is one of the most remote and unforgiving places on Earth. The frozen continent is home to some of the toughest creatures on the planet: penguins, whales, and seals that have adapted to the brutal conditions of the ice-covered waters. Among them is the leopard seal, a powerful predator known for unpredictability. Growing up to 12 feet long, these seals are fast, intelligent, and armed with sharp teeth designed for ripping apart prey. They mostly feed on penguins and fish, but their size and strength make them capable of much more. On December 12, 2017, Dr. Claire Jensen led a small research team near the Antarctic Peninsula, gathering data on leopard seal behavior. She was 34 years old, an experienced marine biologist who had spent the last decade studying marine predators. Her work had taken her worldwide, but she was especially drawn to Antarctica. The isolation, the extreme environment, and the challenge of studying its wildlife made every trip thrilling. That morning, the team set out from their research station on a small inflatable boat, heading toward an area where leopard seals had been spotted the day before. The goal was to observe their hunting patterns, collect underwater footage, and document unique behaviors. Claire had always been fascinated by how these creatures interacted with their environment. Despite their reputation for aggression, there were still many unknowns about their behavior, and she wanted to understand them better. The boat rocked gently as the team reached a large ice floe. Claire checked her diving gear and adjusted her mask and oxygen tank. The water was dangerously cold, but she had done this before. She secured her underwater camera to her wrist and signaled to her colleagues before slipping into the water. Below the surface, the world was silent. Ice stretched out in all directions, glowing faintly in the dim light. Claire moved slowly, scanning the area for movement. Schools of fish darted past, and in the distance she saw a group of penguins gliding effortlessly through the water. She hovered in place, filming their movements, losing herself in the moment. Then, from below, a shadow appeared. It was large, moving smoothly, almost too gracefully for its size. At first, Claire thought it was another seal passing through, but something felt off. How it moved, silent, deliberate, focused, made her uneasy. She turned her camera toward it, trying to get a clearer view. The shadow grew larger, rising toward her. Before she could react, it struck. A crushing force clamped around her arm, the pain immediate and unbearable. The leopard seal had locked its jaws around her wetsuit, its teeth tearing through the fabric and sinking into her flesh. Claire thrashed, trying to pull away, but the seal was too strong. It twisted its body, dragging her downward with terrifying speed. The cold bit into her as she fought against the predator's grip. Her free hand clawed at the water, trying to grab onto something, anything, but there was nothing. Her camera, still strapped to her wrist, dangled uselessly. The seal shook its head violently, trying to disorient her the same way it would with a penguin. Claire kicked hard, forcing herself to stay alert. The pain in her arm grew worse, but she knew she had to act fast. She reached for her diving knife, fumbling as the seal pulled her deeper. With shaking fingers, she managed to grip the handle, and with a desperate swing, she slashed at the animal's side. The seal recoiled, loosening its bite just enough for her to yank her arm free. Blood streamed from the wound, swirling in the water around her. She kicked upward, desperate to reach the surface before the seal attacked again. Her lungs burned, the weight of her gear slowing her down, but she forced herself to move. The surface felt impossibly far away. Then a sudden force yanked her downward again. The leopard seal had returned, this time biting down on her leg. The pain shot through her body worse than before. She screamed, but only bubbles escaped. The predator dragged her even deeper, away from the light and any hope of rescue. Claire's strength faded. The cold was everywhere now, seeping into her bones. Her vision blurred, her grip on the knife weakening. Above, her colleagues noticed the commotion. The water had turned red, and Claire was nowhere in sight. Panic set in as they scrambled to locate her. One grabbed a pole, hoping to pull her up, while another shouted her name. But all they saw was her camera, floating to the surface, spinning slowly as if mocking them. The water settled. The blood mixed into the darkness. Claire never surfaced. For hours the team searched, calling for backup and scanning the water with desperate hope. But there was nothing, no sign of movement. There is no chance of survival. The attack sent shockwaves through the scientific community. Leopard seals had been known to be aggressive, but fatal attacks on humans were rare. Researchers, divers, and marine biologists had always known the risks, but Claire's death was a grim reminder of how unpredictable nature could be. Safety protocols for Antarctic expeditions changed after that day. Divers were required to stay in pairs, and encounters with leopard seals were cautiously treated. The water that had once been Claire's passion had become her grave. The predator she had dedicated her life to studying had ended it in a single, violent moment. The waters of Florida's Gulf Coast had always been familiar to David Reynolds. He had fished these waters for over 20 years, catching everything from snapper to grouper. He knew the tides, the best spots, and the dangers. November 4th, 2024, was supposed to be just another fishing trip, one of many he had taken alone. He woke early, packed his gear, and launched his boat from a small Cedar Key, Florida marina. The air was cool and the water was calm. It was a perfect day for fishing. David was 42 years old and had built his life around the ocean. He owned a small fishing business selling fresh catches to local markets and restaurants. He had lived on the water without fear of what lurked beneath. Sharks were common in these waters, especially bull sharks. He had seen them many times, sometimes even losing a catch to them, but they had never been a threat to him before. By noon, David was about 10 miles offshore. His boat, the Seafarer, rocked gently as he cast his line. He had already caught a few fish and hoped for something bigger before returning. He sat back, sipping from a water bottle, watching the waves. Nothing seemed unusual. Then the first sign of trouble appeared. A sudden splash erupted a few yards from his boat. David turned his head, expecting to see a large fish or dolphin. But what he saw instead made his stomach tighten. A dark shape moved just beneath the water, circling slowly. A dorsal fin cut through the surface, moving with deliberate intent. David had seen plenty of sharks before, but something about this one felt different. It was big, too big. It moved in a way that made his instincts scream at him to be careful. He tightened his grip on his fishing rod, watching as the shark circled again, this time coming closer. He reached for his knife, a habit he had developed when fishing alone, and kept his eyes on the water. Then, without warning, the shark lunged. A massive force struck the side of his boat, tilting it. David stumbled, barely keeping his balance. He turned just in time to see the shark, at least 13 feet long, rise from the depths, its powerful jaws clamping onto the boat's edge. The impact sent shockwaves through his body. The shark thrashed, sending water spraying everywhere. David grabbed onto the railing, trying to keep from falling overboard. His fishing gear was scattered across the deck. The shark released the boat for a second, but then it came again, this time straight at him. Before he could react, the shark lunged higher, its head reaching over the side. Its jaws clamped down onto his leg. The pain was instant, a crushing force, unlike anything he had ever felt. He screamed, trying to pull away, but the shark's grip was too strong. The predator twisted, dragging him off balance. His hands clawed at the boat, but he lost his grip. In a split second, he was in the water. Coldness hit him like a shock. He kicked wildly, trying to reach the surface, but the shark still dragged him down. The water around him turned red. He swung his fists, struggling against the unimaginable strength of the predator. He reached for his knife, but his fingers were numb and shaking. For a moment, the shark let go. His body floated upward, and he gasped for air as he broke the surface. His boat was just feet away. He had to get back. But before he could move, the shark came again. It hit him with full force, knocking the air from his lungs. His vision blurred as the massive creature opened its jaws wide. David barely had time to react before the predator clamped down again, this time on his torso. The pressure was unbearable. He felt himself being pulled downward, deeper into the ocean's grip. The sea swallowed his screams. His arms flailed, his fingers grasping at nothing. The world above faded. Back on shore, David's absence didn't go unnoticed. He had told a few friends about his trip, and concern grew when he failed to return by evening. A call was made to the Coast Guard. A search boat was sent out. When they reached the area where he had been fishing, they found his boat drifting, the deck smeared with blood. His fishing gear was scattered, some floating in the water. His radio was still on, but David was gone. Divers were sent into the water, searching for any sign of him, and hours passed. They only found shreds of his clothing and a few broken pieces of equipment. There was no body, only silence. The attack sent shockwaves through the community. Fishermen who had spent their lives on these waters were left shaken. Bull sharks had attacked humans before, but this was something different. The sheer brutality of it, the way David had been swallowed whole, was almost unheard of. Experts examined the case and noted that bull sharks are among the most aggressive species in the world. Unlike great whites, which often bite and retreat, bull sharks are known to attack with relentless force. They can thrive in salt and fresh water, and their unpredictable nature makes them among the most dangerous sharks to encounter. Locals called for more caution, and fishermen changed their routines. Some stopped fishing alone, and others carried emergency beacons, unwilling to risk the same fate. But the ocean doesn't change. It remains vast, untamed, and ruled by predators like the one that had taken David Reynolds. His name became a warning, spoken in whispers at the marina. A reminder that even the most experienced can be caught off guard. His boat was eventually pulled back to shore, empty, a ghost of the man who once steered it. And the waters off Florida's Gulf Coast continued their endless motion, hiding the secrets of what lay beneath. The Bahamas, known for its clear waters and stunning coral reefs, had always been a dream destination for travelers. It was where tourists swam alongside colorful fish, explored underwater caves, and felt the ocean's warmth. It was the perfect location for their honeymoon for newlyweds Emily and Chris Graves. They had spent months planning this trip, choosing the Bahamas for its beauty and promise of adventure. On September 3, 2022, they woke early in their beachfront resort in Nassau, enjoying breakfast on their balcony as the waves rolled in. The past week had been filled with boat tours, sunset dinners, and long walks on the beach. But for Emily, a marine biologist, nothing compared to being in the water. She had spent years studying ocean life, always fascinated by its mystery. Chris, 31, was not as comfortable in the water as Emily, but he loved how her face lit up whenever she talked about marine life. He had learned to snorkel because of her, slowly growing to appreciate the ocean as she did. That morning, Emily convinced him to book a snorkeling trip to a famous reef off the Exuma Cays. They arrived at the dock by noon, joining a small group of tourists. Paradise Reef Charters was known for its guided snorkeling tours in areas teeming with marine life. Their guide, a Bahamian named Andre, greeted them and explained the usual safety rules. Stay in pairs, move slowly, and avoid touching the coral. The group of 8 boarded a small boat, the engine humming as they sped toward the reef. As the boat slowed near the reef, Emily's excitement grew. She could already see fish darting beneath the surface. Chris felt a mix of nerves and excitement. He had snorkeled before, but never this far from shore. Andre anchored the boat and handed out masks and fins. The water looked inviting, and the reef stretched below in a maze of coral formations. Emily adjusted her gear and was the first to slip beneath the surface. Chris followed, staying close behind. For the first 20 minutes, everything was perfect. Schools of fish moved around them, their scales flashing. Emily swam further, marveling at the coral, while Chris stayed near the boat, watching her. The other tourists floated nearby, taking in the beauty of the reef. Then the water changed. The small fish swam calmly for moments before scattering in a flash. The reef suddenly felt empty, the usual hum of marine life replaced by an eerie silence. Emily focused on the coral, but Chris didn't notice immediately. He saw something large moving in the distance, a dark shape slowly circling. His chest tightened. Before he could react, the bull shark attacked. It came from below, its powerful body surging upward. In an instant, its jaws clamped onto Emily's torso, crushing her ribcage. The force lifted her from the water before dragging her down. Air bubbles burst around her as her body twisted in the shark's grip. Chris heard the splash and turned, expecting to see Emily surfacing. Instead, he saw a cloud of red spreading through the water. His heart pounded as he swam toward the blood. His arms sliced through the water, his breath coming in gasps. Then he saw her. Emily's body was limp, her arms floating, her eyes wide in shock. The shark still held her, its jaws locked around her midsection. The moment felt frozen. Then, with a violent shake, the shark pulled her under. Chris screamed, but his voice was lost beneath the waves. The other snorkelers panicked, kicking frantically toward the boat. Andre and the crew shouted, throwing life rings into the water. One grabbed a long pole, slamming it against the surface to scare the shark away. Another pulled Chris onto the boat, holding him back as he tried to dive after Emily. More movement beneath the water. The scent of blood had drawn more sharks. Chris struggled against the crew's grip, his face twisted in agony. He could still see Emily beneath the surface, limp as the predator circled. The water churned violently, flashes of gray cutting through the red cloud. The shark that had first attacked her still held on, shaking its massive head. Then, in a sudden movement, it released her. Her body drifted upward, floating briefly before another shark struck. Andre lunged forward, hooking his arm around Chris to keep him from diving back in. Another crew member grabbed a long pole and pushed it toward Emily's body, trying to pull her closer. With a desperate heave, 2 men hauled her onto the deck. Chris collapsed beside her, his hands hovering over her torn body, unsure where to touch. Her torso was shredded, her breathing shallow, her skin pale. Blood pooled beneath her, staining the deck. The boat's engine roared as Andre pushed it to full speed. The passengers sat in stunned silence, some sobbing, others unable to look. Chris clutched Emily's hand, whispering, willing her to hold on. She took a weak breath, then another. Then she stopped. By the time they reached shore, she was gone. Authorities were waiting at the dock, alerted by the crew's distress call. Paramedics rushed on board, but they could not do anything. Witnesses gave statements describing the attack in shaky voices. Experts later examined the case, noting that while bull sharks were common in the Bahamas, such a violent and direct attack on a human was rare. Some believed fishing activity nearby had drawn the sharks closer, increasing their aggression. Others pointed to warmer ocean temperatures, which had recently altered shark behavior. News of the attack spread quickly. Headlines worldwide described it as one of the most brutal shark encounters in recent history. The debate over whether tourists should be allowed to snorkel in shark-prone waters reignited. Some called for stricter regulations, arguing that companies should be required to monitor for shark activity before allowing guests into the water. Others defended the ocean, saying that humans entered it at their own risk. Chris returned home in silence. The honeymoon that had begun with love and laughter had ended in horror.